Why, Curt Doolittle.
Morning, Dr. Brad.
Here we meet again in this fine episode 230104. You hit that like, subscribe, notification button, and then leave the glorious comments below. We thrive on them.
Who?
Here we do.
Yes, we do. Brad's trying to warm me up here because I'm waiting minutes.
I'm supposed to say one more thing that check out the donate page on the foundation website.
All right. So Brad's trying to warm me up because I haven't finished my coffee yet. And the holidays are bad for haircut. I can't get a haircut.
Really?
Well, I have a few left.
Yeah, you do. Attaboy. The one who knows.
My ambition is to grow old looking like Darwin with the long white beard, and I've considered being trying to look like Einstein, but I just look like one of those alcoholics that lives under the bridge when my hair gets out of hand.
Why?
Anyway.
It's just how it goes, man. We don't get to pick that.
We have to stick to what works for us.
That's right. That's right.
All right. Okay. Do you have any topics that you wanted to cover?
I do not. I just have been doing my general work and proceeding along as planned.
Okay. So I have a big topic today.
Oh.
And I don't want you to react immediately. I want you to think about it, okay? Because I actually need to help with this answer.
All right.
So start out with a bit of humor to put in context. Okay. I am somewhat conscious, though of not. I am somewhat conscious of the fact that there's this Aspie OCD giant and steam-powered engine in the back of my head that does everything on its own will, and me and my personality are a tiny little rider on its elephant. And I don't always really know what's going on. You know what I mean? I just follow the pattern. So I sort of, and the second thing is I tend to be, because I work, the way I work, which is to reduce everything to causes, because that's the only way I really feel I understand it. I do things very systematically. And so if I look at the record of the work, it's really freaking systematic. And so it's produced, thousands. I mean, it's probably 20,000 pages.
Wow.
Something on that order. It might be a little less than that. Unlikely. Something in that order. It's thousands of pages. All right. Now, a lot of that's notes, right?
Right.
And quite a bit of it is repetition because I have to work on a piece. But we've been working together for quite a while now. And what you've said is, focus on the science. And so we've organized the information, which is what you've helped me do, as a science. Right. In other words, we use the science to expose a formal logic of the universe. And we've ordered that information scientifically, which means from its origins in the smallest part of the universe to its most complex manifestation as group evolutionary strategies, which you could think of as an ecology. Right. So in attempting to So anyway, so I'm really freaking thrilled with that, because essentially it's science and logic. It's no longer philosophy.
Right.
That science has resulted in a science of law. Right. In other words, because cooperation is what we're really talking about whenever we're talking about all human phenomena, because whether it's pre-conscious or conscious cooperation, it's cooperation that is the multiplier on the physical laws. And intelligence in organizing cooperation, the evolutionary compounding of that, of conscious cooperation. So we've got a science, right? Which is the purpose of science is to identify the first principles, the irreducible first principles, from which you can make claims about all subsequent claims. In other words, it creates a universal system of measurement for universal falsification testing of any scientific claims. In other words, what's testifiable. Now, before that, I worked on history. And after history, I worked on what we would call philosophy. And I did that in the libertarian tradition, which is really a blend of morality and law. In other words, right? Morality and law, the way philosophy is a bridge between religion and empiricism. And so
Sorry.
The problem is that when you organize philosophy, it's organized quite differently from the science. It's also quite a bit easier to follow because it's literary, whereas the science is analytic. And so we then applied the science of the law to the law and created an output of the law. Now, I would say the philosophies easily understood, because that's my experience. The law is hard, the science is quite a bit harder to understand because there's just more logical dependency required. The law is the output of this general to specific test, and that means the Constitution is the output of this particular test, because the Constitution, as we've proposed it, is a universal within which we recommend policy particulars. It's important. Is that we say this is the universally optimum system of government for man, but your local conditions, your demographics really, and stage of development may determine how much of this you apply in whatever you want.
That's right.
So, and then I don't talk about the prosecution because you don't like me to. But that really ends up being the history of what went wrong, and that explains in context. That's the first thing that has context, is this historical explanation for what we consider the feminine masculine conflict that's being explored by the world's only two elites, which are the Semites and the Jews, the Ashkenazi and the Europeans. Not the Semites, the Ashkenazi and the Europeans. And likely because the Ashkenazi are essentially half European.
Half European, okay.
So we have a context. And then from that conflict, in that context, and understanding that history, we can then take the next step, which is producing a reductive version of all of the above. As I don't know if you'd call it a religion, but it's closer to it's called a secular religion, but it's more of how we explain the unification of the aristocratic masculine and the priestly feminine, right, into a set of reductive principles that's very short. And that's the condensation of it that a person can remember. And then, of course, we have a collection of myths and traditions, parables that help us understand those simple reduced principles. So I didn't really know what I was doing here, right? It just sort of emerged.
Right.
So I'm going to show you my screen. So when I try to put this into one book, it becomes impossible, because the meaningful organization of the philosophy and the science and the story and the reduction of that story are in conflict. Moreover, it adds to excessively long books. That makes sense.
Yeah, so I have long thought this.
Well, we could instead think of it as a set of markets.
I like that a lot.
And that there are markets for myths, for religions, for histories, for philosophies, for sciences and law.
That's right.
And so since all this fucking information exists, why try to fit it into one structure? But this structure, yeah, okay. This is where you're fucking right, and it pisses me off.
Wait, I swear to God, I told you this a year ago. And it's all good, man. Like I say, the water works. It's just slow as hell. Rock is so hard, man. It's all good. I don't care. I'm not.
I
here
love
for
you, but
fast.
sometimes I just I don't even want to take it out physically, but spiritually, I just want to smack you sometimes, because you're right, and it pisses me off.
I realize that.
But I can't leap to conclusions.
I know.
I have to make proofs. So I've done the proof.
It's like, wait, here's my assessment of the situation. So Curt's trying to pull together all these drafts, and he found 20,000 pages of stuff, and he's like, that's a really, really long book. It's like congressionally long. It's hard work, even when you got a guy hired to do it.
So the problem is that, in my opinion, Martin can compile this.
Yeah.
I think I can only compile this.
Okay.
I think, this is already compiled. This is already compiled. And the first part of this is compiled, although it has to be edited quite a bit. And it doesn't have the part that you and I would need to work on, which is the resolution of the conflict. In other words, completing the Aquinian, or the Augustinian Aquinian project of the synthesis. Right.
Yes.
And of course, one of the reasons I want to pull out all these myths, just like to pull out these histories, is that I want to be able to show the pattern. In other words, some of our myths are pre-literate, right? They're very old. Yes. The Green Man myth, which is where everything seems to freaking come from, is probably it's the same myth as what's the not Loki, the Mesopotamian chaos guy that's represents man and nature.
Yes,
Uh,
that sounds right.
yeah, my brain doesn't want to go there, and I haven't had enough coffee. So what I want to do is show that this pattern, this helped me show that the pattern is eternal across all our generations, because we've produced we've produced myths that have carried from the Proto-Indo-European into the Indo-European, into the European, into the Mediterranean, which is the combination of the Greco Anatolian and the Italo-Celtic and the Germanic and the Balto-Slavic. So we have seen all this same theme in different forms, and so that's a very clear way of documenting it. Now, I kind of got miffed at somebody yesterday, because I get miffed when people go after Kevin McDonald when what we're doing is they're trying to get attention by showboating. Yes. And their work is trivial, and because they're freaking ignorant, they think they've actually said something intelligent when they're really so far over the, it's like the crayon version of some kid talking about how he understands physics,
right?
Or math. So in making that argument, I tried to make the point that which I don't make often, and I suppose I should, because I don't make it because it's obvious to me, but I think it's unascertainable by the public, is that like if I make an oil painting, I can take apart the oil painting and figure out what it's made of.
Right.
You can. There's nothing you can't reverse engineer. This includes language, and I don't mean like language, which of course I have disambiguated fully, but what I mean is your utterances.
Okay.
And so we can find patterns in your utterances now, yes. Right? And that just like we can find patterns in your DNA, just like we can find patterns in your behavior.
Right.
Find patterns in history. And so what I said was, I don't have to know anything else than the history of your arguments to be able, which tells me how you're lying, and your lies tell me the truth. In other words, the pattern of your lies tell me the truth.
There is something to be detected there, no question about it. And it is a real thing.
Right. So we know what the truth is because we've done the science. Anything that varies from the science is, and there's using the technology we call lying, because it is a technology. It's an advanced technology, unfortunately.
As you have proven it.
I have proven with a degree to which disheartens me daily. And that if I want, given where, AI's made a splash right now. So the way I say it today, it might sound like I'm jumping on it, but I'm just trying to say that I'm not jumping on the novelty train. I'm saying that if I say something about AI, it's just that people will understand it now where they haven't understood it in the past. And so my point is that the way, let's say, the GPT system works, right, that's out there, new AI works, is decomposition and decomposition association. So what I'm trying to say is that I got to finish this first, but I could easily pay a bunch of grad students to create, given what I've taught here, right? How to produce an AI that would disassemble all written language into its methods of lying.
Yes.
Lies are be constructed, and then
So
show
a reader that will tell us something. We don't know what it will tell us.
that's fucking terrifying.
What's terrifying?
Because the reality that would emerge from the fact that most talking is, you know what prestige is? It's like
Yes.
when as a magician, I gotta put my hand, directs you to this thing when he's actually doing something back here.
Misdirection, yes.
And prestige is just inspirational, right? Version of it. So the fact that we could decompose all language into this structure, that becomes terrifying because there's now nowhere to fucking hide. So while on one,
I like you, but what terrifies you thrills me to no end, because it's like, I don't know why. I'm like, that is the right answer.
well,
It's
it's
like, but we get some sunshine in here.
well, yeah. And meanwhile, hold on. Meanwhile, what's happening is the left is trying to safeguard AIs that don't say anything truthful. Yet we can create an equal AI that would say that this consists of lying.
And what are they trying to do? We can tell you.
Right. So, and as far as I know, that's the AI that produces general artificial intelligence. Right, because you're reducing something to truths, which can then be reduced to models, which then can be used for predictions of reality, independent of how it's framed and spoken by individuals.
Yes, sir.
So, you already answered my hard question.
I know. I got the answers, man. You know, just sorry. It's kind of boring, isn't it?
I expected to have to convince you.
Oh, I don't know of what.
I was telling Rudyard at What If Alt Hist yesterday that I don't even have to write the fucking history because he's done it all.
Very good work too.
I mean, it's just like I went through the videos that I recommend of his, and they're the same ones he thinks are his favorite, and they're the ones that use explanatory, you know, comparative civilization or comparative aspects of civilization. You know, like I don't know. See, there's one thing when you're looking at a view of history and you hear it as another voice, and when you're looking at a view of history and you know it's absolutely true, absolutely positively scientifically correct, right? And
Right.
his is. And the number of historians that are like that is fairly small. We call them the syntopical historians, but they're the synthetic historians, and there's, you know, a handful of them in history. And then they're the ones who lie, like Yuval Harari and who's the guy that wrote Howard Zinn. And of course, we know they're lying because it's not an opinion. It's not an opinion even about what they're saying. It's that they're using lies to tell the story, right? I mean, and it's not an opinion.
It's not an opinion that it's a lie.
It's not an opinion that it's a lie.
I see I saw you were tweeting, you were in a tweet and someone made a waggy statement, and it was like about it being you have a right to your opinion. You go, that is not my opinion, that is my judgment.
Yes.
I said, that's awesome. Don't get confused.
Don't be confused.
I like that.
But you know,
but see, this is the hard thing, because I think the lefty types, the feminine mind, can't imagine that you can have a judgment that is based on science that is true and unavoidably so, and it's not your opinion. And they just have to regard it as opinion. I mean, honestly,
it's too appalling for them. And of course we know, you know, we've discussed this. We know why they avoid the truth is because it forces you to accept responsibility, and not only for yourself but for the behavior of others in the commons, and those people are too frightened already to bear that responsibility, or they're too incapable. And women are more neurotic, so they're more naturally frightened. You're going to get more women to do that.
I'm going to restate that, if I may.
Sure.
It's the very construction of the concept of the truth is abhorrent to the feminine mind. It's truly hard to imagine as a single truth that underlies what is going on here. It's, in reality, is just hard for some minds to tolerate. Which is, it's just unfathomable how strange that is.
Well, can I turn off the share for a second?
Yes.
So as we've discussed before, I tend to view the 20th as the burden of introgression of females into politics.
Okay, I'm going to ask you to disambiguate that term, the burden of introgression. Why do you say that?
Because it imposes additional costs that are previously unaccounted for. It doesn't mean there's no value. And we haven't prohibited the female antisocial behavior that we've prohibited with males in politics.
When you say the burden, what it's like, I see it as starting in the 19th century and creeping in and not becoming an overburden until the 20th century.
Correct.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
And so we're in agreement. I just wanted to.
It's just a delayed effect of the Industrial Revolution, as you know, because in order, you can give somebody an access to a territory, so to speak. And in this case, it's an economic and political territory, and it takes them a while to learn how to turn that opportunity into exploitable gains.
Right.
Of course, if you don't prohibit criminality, then it's good. People are going to specialize in crime. Now, women's criminality is usually ignored and forgiven by men because it's never been possible to scale it, and usually it's been controllable. But what we have discovered is that under industrialization and under the academy and education, without the safeguards of men prohibiting women from this behavior, they've engaged in their natural female antisocial behavior, which is the criminality against the commons. Now, the fact that it's not physical, which means it's actually social and informational, which they destroy information, destroy truth, and destroy institutions and cooperation. What they're doing in favor of non-adaptation and hyperconsumption. Men didn't block that anymore. So when they do that, we just didn't have the conditions often in the past where women could express their natural antisocial behavior without retaliation. So like many things, the history of civilization is the history of outlawing irreciprocities that are born of opportunities that emerge with the increases in scale and anonymity. And so we're at a place where we've increased the scale and anonymity, and then we've introgressed women into a polity and economy even into academy, which is education, to the point where their antisocial behaviors that they consider acceptable, the way men consider violence natural, right? Requires a greater degree of precision in our laws to suppress the new opportunities for antisocial, which is really criminal behavior. So it's not, I mean, if you look at it as a system and you don't involve yourself in the emotional experience of it, it's just fucking obvious.
Well, I tested this out this week. I was talking to people and I go, this is the basic thesis of it, of the work that we've been doing, which is the Constitution was intrinsically flawed from the get-go, and the founding fathers could not imagine the errors that they made. Otherwise, they would not have made those errors. And it was just due to the fact that they presumed falsely that the safeguards in the common law for the prevention of feminine misbehavior would remain in place. And that was just simply an error. And I told this to patients, and the patients they understand the thesis of it.
Yes.
And they understand the misbehavior of women in the context of the greater historical arc that has occurred since the inception of the Constitution. And it's like, that's an elevator talk.
Well,
and they accept it and understand it.
they accept it and understand it, but you're also in a context, right, where you're a believable authority that they trust.
I see. That's
and,
fair.
And so what you want to test that is I want to compliment you. Your delivery will work across domains, right? But you would have to try that same thing in a room of people who were predisposed to disagree with you and didn't think you was an authority. Right? Like in many things, it's like I know that as if you're wealthy and a CEO and you're known, people automatically take what
credentials. It's a credential.
Treat it as a credential. Now, I would say, well, those are the best credentials because they're meritocratic, right? They're demonstrated through adversarial competition. But skills aren't generalizable, right, under most conditions. So you have to. I mean, I in the Ukraine, I was on TV a couple of times just because I was an American businessman, and they sort of see that as where they want to get to. And so they'd interview me because I'm, of course, bringing high-paid salaries and stuff to Ukraine, and I have a belief in Ukraine's economic future. So they're listening to that. But I mean, for all intents and purposes, I wasn't saying anything that every fucking CEO in America would say. But because I was there, right, and I'm associated with them, and I run this little think tank in the business, I would get on TV. So context determines credibility.
Right.
So what the test of the idea, and I think it'd be interesting for you to run this test. Test of ideas is whether your elevator speeches can work. I think they probably will, because I've seen Brandon do it, and he crosses political lines pretty often. So I think that would do it because when I do it, of course, I do it in ASP terms, and it's a little rough on people. So if we can reduce it to statements that people can understand, like that, narratives, really they have to be short. Then it works. I think that's what we want to get to testing. We want to test that hypothesis, which is what I use social media for, is running.
Right.
I just run tests. Does this mean?
That's right.
Lindsay was complaining yesterday that he says Christians actually don't want to understand. They just want to be mad. And I'm like, the depth behind that. He obviously doesn't understand the depth behind what he just said. Most people don't want to do anything. They just want to be mad because they think being mad will cause someone to satisfy their wants, when the enemy absolutely doesn't want to satisfy their wants. They're happy if you're mad. Right. So people basically try to avoid costs at all times. And the second thing is, well, Jay, I was telling he ignores me, but the second thing I said was he's still mad at me because of something I misspoke on. Or not mad, is probably discounting. So he came out and I'm like, James, look, the number of people that can understand what you're talking about in the literary context, because he's not really, he's a mathematician, but he's really a literary philosopher, right? And that's what he's doing. He's doing
He's doing literature searches and then reviews of literature.
Right. And so he's really in the literary, and it's big difference between a critic and a philosopher. A philosopher, a critic judges a thing, or opines on a thing. What a philosopher does is try to integrate textualism into your current context, right? They're forming bridges, right? Which he does phenomenally well. Now, like James, you say that, but the number of people who can understand what you're saying in the literary context is logarithmically larger than the people can understand it in the philosophical context, the rational context, historical context, rational historical context, which is logarithmically larger than people can understand the scientific and logical context.
Okay.
Right? I mean, we max out every market really quickly because we actually know the IQ span of every one of those markets. Right? It's not a mystery. I mean, you can go look it up in 20 places online and realize that there's like a half standard of variation between whatever median, whatever span, like the doctor's average IQ is 125 or something like that. Well, that's because that's artificially low because there's some dumb doctors, right? I mean, but if you look at the doctors who are successful, right, they're not on them; they're way above 125. You look at some of these surgeons, and they're up here in the 150s, like me. I shouldn't have said that. Oops. So when you get into these things, you're like, okay, well, you're like, well, every one of those things is a market. Now you have to come up with a trickle down market for the people beneath that, and that's history. So once you go from philosophy, you have to go down to history, and from history you have to go down to parable, right? You got to reduce these to the frame in which they can cross the boundary of association between the message and the people who need to hear it. I listen to Lindsay, and I'm like, I learned from him because I haven't got the fucking patience to read some of that shit. Right? It makes me furious.
I'm on your team. It's like he gets a nose holder
I mean,
award.
he's just
it's
and he reads these things 2, 3, 4, 5 times, and I'm like, how do you
stomach it?
How do you handle it? And so he goes through it, and got to appreciate. I mean, I appreciate it because I worked in a similar way on certain topics. Certainly the law, I worked that way. So you're like, well, but your expectation that people are going to understand you is a frustration. It's the same thing I have. I was talking to somebody yesterday offline, and it's like, I'm talking to you, right? I mean, and you and the guys, but you guys have been following me a long time. So if I say something relatively profound, you'll just like it or be able to use it, right? But when you talk to somebody who's actually smart enough, who isn't a follower, right, and they get it, and it causes them to have an epiphany that radically changes the way they're thinking, right? Well, that person has pure intellectual potential, but they're rare. Those people are rare because you need a lot of knowledge. As you go up, you need more and more knowledge, and that not the form of that knowledge has to be more concrete. Likewise, I was talking to somebody else, and it's using the religious context, and I'm like, well, that's actually, the problem with the religion is fundamentalism. It isn't the fact that there's a lot of truth in there. Right? It's when you try to turn scripture into a logic instead of a wisdom and reason. Right? When you claim it's true as in historically or evidentially or existentially, rather than the contents of the parable convey a truth about the world. And so he's going through it, and I'm like, this is what I love. The problem is, why don't more people in religion see religion the old way, which is how he was doing it, which is as its wisdom. And why does, and he says, well, he's correct. I knew the answer, but I wanted him to elucidate it. And he said, well, it's because the more
out of control you are and the more neurotic you are, the more you need a rigorous framework to find mindfulness. So essentially, being out of control is a situational affect, right? I mean, you're just there, and it's just a fact, right? And when you're neurotic, it's biological fact, right? You're out of
Right.
control because your brain is out of control, right? And your life is out of control. So people need these rigorous things in order to be certain that their judgments are consistent, and they need them on terms they can access and entertain. This is why Christian sects, which we hierarchically stack them, roughly correspond to every half standard deviation in IQ, is because the more fundamentalist, the simpler you have to be, and the more neurotic or more out of control perceiving. And then you have people like me who are fundamentally Christian, right? But we just don't. We've internalized it as, well, these are principles. Even if I talk to God every day, right? These are principles, but I would never engage in fundamentalism. Does that make sense? I would never.
I understand.
Right. And so I just find it interesting that Lindsay is running up against the limit. And I've tested the limit with fundamentalism, Nazis, ethnocentrism, ethno-nationalism, and civic nationalism. I've tested all those boundaries, and they're impassable. Absolutely, positively impassable boundaries. Because you have the limit of ethno-nationalism, which is the limit of fundamentalism, which is the religious, and you have the limit of civic nationalism with the legal.
Oh, so these are the extreme cognitive
balance, and it's not, and you can't affect them because the people can't conceive of the world other than as it is. Now, as you might argue, well, they could if we educated them instead of letting them gravitate towards some extreme. But you can't convince those people, they're unreachable. Now, there's people who are just in the middle space who aren't reachable because they simply lack the knowledge. They lack the foundations to be able to reach them. What do you're seeing something that I'm talking about, and I'm hoping.
No, there's no question, but this is true. And it's like the question is this is not to, it is no, I'm gonna paraphrase you a little bit from my notes here. So there's an association of IQ range for each method and system of information distribution.
Correct.
And there's certain messages associated with each method of distribution. And at the limits of these systems, we end up with these people that are at low adaptability and requiring high rigidity that are difficult to communicate with.
Correct.
And the issue is, go ahead.
It's that the neural economy is concretized such that the friction of change is too high in these individuals, and they found a place they found mindfulness in the sense of control given to them by the frame of reference that they rely on.
Right. So the trick is the trick is it's Tai Chi.
Okay, I wonder where this is going.
You don't attempt to move those people from the position that they have occupied in strength. You encourage them in their strength, and then you cause them to behave in their strength in a manner that is consistent with our mutual goals.
Correct. I'm going to address that as if you have a fundamental truth that's advantageous to everybody, you must deliver the message in a way that they can access and make use of it and agree. Rudy at Woodolph has said it is like he says that ideology, which is the current political substitute for religious factionalism, is has to be delivered in a means that's accessible to the individual.
Right. which is what there was an interesting function there that when I was writing it down, the association of IQ range for each method and system of information distribution, which is it's related to the associations in the mind that are generated by that methodology.
Right, and beneath that, we still have the three personality types: the feminine emotive, the masculine dominant, and the ascendant male libertarian, right, or neutral. And we still have those core personality types, and everybody's somewhere on that fucking spectrum. The dimension that you turn is just maturity, right? You have the three triangles, then you have the maturity as the opposite dimension right out of the center, and maturity will converge, right? That's what happens, right? It's where you get your tetrahedron that you've always talking about, or something. You go up to the center, and the three things converge, because basically all elites that are that actually are elites is the wrong word. All masters of their frame, right? Whether converge on identical rules, just as sciences do, identical rules, despite different frames of conveying them, empathically or organizationally or reciprocally, and they all converge. So I just come up it from the neutral side, which is, it's, I just want everybody to be fucking happy. So it's my legal side, but you could come up with it from the authority.
And that's it. I talked to the judge about this, my friend the judge, and it's like it's not about making people happy. It's about making everybody equally unhappy.
Well, that's what that's the job of the law.
Yes, it's just that's the balance point. It's like it's not happy.
I've lost that book, although I can visualize it, and I've lost the title of it, but it was written by a law firm in Texas that has to train a lot of paralegals and junior lawyers as they come into the firm, showing them what the difference is between how law is taught and how it's practiced, and what law really does. I actually found that to be one of the best books I ever read on law, right? And I wish I could remember it. I can just visualize it, but I can't pull up the title. And it was originally a course book. I can't remember where. It was a course book in some small college. But anyway, it's called Business in the Law or something like that. Anyway, it's very clear that there's a demand for efficiency in the judicial system that is a reaction to the ability for people's bullshit to overload everyone involved. And so a lot of what the judicial system exists is trying to prevent the introgression of enough bullshit that human beings can still figure out what the fuck's going on. And that understanding was quite good. And this is conversely, almost always, if it gets to court, almost everybody's always wrong. In other words, if it gets to court, it hasn't been settled, it's because everybody's a little bit to blame. So the way you resolve that is you say, the court says, well, it just assumes that no matter what it does, everyone's going to be equally unhappy. Right? Well, that's true, because everyone's equally sort of to blame.
Nobody's right.
So, you got me here. You talked to the judge, that's why. And he's of course right. Isn't he also ex-military?
No.
I want to interview this woman who I met yesterday online. I found her on Twitter. I accidentally responded to her on Twitter. It turned out that she's what we wish most women were. And then I go look up her background, and she's from the military. And I'm like, well, I don't want to talk to her now, because I want to know if it's like a selection, it's a selection bias. In other words, well, women who are more likely to be rational are in the military.
Maybe they
Or-
get trained into
Or
it.
maybe they get trained into it. I suspect they get trained into it because that's what happens to men. So I suspect it happens to women too. And so I think I want to explore that because it's one thing looking at men who have, thousands of years of tradition that being handed down to them that appeals to their instincts. And another one to see how women go on and experience their own change. And
Yeah.
so I want to, and I think there might be more value gained from the woman's perception, how she changed the world, and enough to be able to talk about why we need to have certain kinds of mindfulness training into group team responsibility instead of individual. And you're a precious snowflake that should flower without constraints. And you wonder why all these conservatives and military people are happy. And all these people who are like precious flowers, they're fucking miserable. Why? Because they actually don't understand the world as it is. They're still children. They don't realize it because they don't realize that cooperation occurs despite the fact that we aren't, it's a Pareto or Nash distribution, whereas we're not all completely satisfied. It's just, this is the maximum level of satisfaction that the most of us can reach. It's not possible to do better. I think the military does that by shaking the selfishness out of you.
It's interesting that, I discuss this with my business associate quite frequently.
Because he's a military.
Pardon me?
He's ex-military, right?
Yes, he's a Marine. And yeah. And it's like he talks, I get snippets of stories over the years about basic training or just how they train those guys. And it's an astounding thing that has been going on for thousands of years. And it's like how they do it. It's very finely tuned psychological intervention.
Yes, it's intervention.
That is just, it's not nice. And it tears the guy down and puts him back together again in a different way.
It turns them into an adult.
Yes.
Right. And it's especially important in the military where you're getting 18, 19-year-old boys who are not always from the most advantaged families.
Yes.
And if they're lucky, they're Christian, which is basically fully integrated in the military predisposition. All right. And so the military's got to train large numbers of 19-year-old boys by forcibly adulting them.
Wow.
In a period of time. And when you understand that's what's going on, it's brilliant. But until you understand it's adulting you that's happening, you realize that's the ritual we do at 19 that our ancestors did by, of converting boys at 14. The question is, it appears if we're going to introgress women into the workforce, we have to do the same thing with women somehow. And they're not going to like it because adulting for women is way harder. I'm waiting for I'm watching your response there, see if that even worked.
That works.
Okay, you just didn't like it.
Well, it's like, it's true. It's just too true.
It's so funny how women can see us as childish when it's just, and we see them as childish when it's really a difference in responsibilities. We're adulting.
Yeah.
Right. And so I'm like, well, you're right. I mean, I don't know. It's like the women do their thing in groups, right? I mean, and they're really fucking good at it. And it's a kind of calculation, right? But its sphere of influence is whatever's directly ascertainable, right? Mm-hmm. The male thing is we're really good at it, but it's in the sphere of influence that isn't directly ascertainable. It has to be systemized in order to work.
Right.
So my opinion when you watch women is that they're like, I can do an intervention or interfere or gossip with this person or whatever and influence, but it's direct. But the male problem is that everything is scale. And so we can't directly do anything. We have to systematically do everything. Does that make sense? And so women view us as childish. We're like, that's not in my responsibility set. right? And that's women's stuff. I don't know how to do that, right? I mean, I can't even. We're essentially colorblind to it. I mean, but women are colorblind to time and scale the way we're colorblind to personality differences. Because for men, we're dangerous, and so if men organize together pretty easily because it's too dangerous not to. Whereas women, they don't organize, and children, they don't organize very well. Well, more largely because they're not dangerous, except socially for women. Dangerous children aren't dangerous, right? So
They're just noisy.
they're not self-regulatory the way men are. And so it's just this, the problem has been the introgression of women who lack frankly the cognitive, the natural cognitive and intuition stability to enter into domains which are beyond their perception, and in which they had tried to introgress female and managed by female sense of what we consider authoritarianism instead of systematizing. So they're trying to produce positive assertions rather than negative limits, right? Which is what the male thing does. We produce negative limits. And so it makes perfect sense that these instincts are there, but I mean, it's also makes perfect sense that they're misapplied outside of the range of feminine intuition and capacity. And it's just like,
And it's undetectable that is happening to the people who are performing the negative acts.
Correct. They have no idea. So I mean, it's like I was saying about the Jewish female thing yesterday. I don't know. I think you probably read that stuff. Is that, you've gotten me over being angry, but the truth is, they're like women. You can't fucking blame them. It's just who's the adult in the room? Well, you guys got to fix the fucking problem, which is outlaw this irreciprocal behavior.
How hard was that?
Huh?
That's all it takes.
Well, what it takes is the increase in resolution as we presume the masculine nature of a polity, and we bring the intersexual relationship of the family up into the political system, and therefore we have to suppress those things those crimes that were usually held within the family in the political system. It's just obvious that this is going to happen, because we know that as wealth increases, people don't concentrate in a single area like they did when they're poor, right? They deviate and explore their intuitions more. So we have to prohibit a wider range of criminal intuitions. And unfortunately, the way women practice disapproval and approval versus falsehood and truth is essentially criminal in the political sphere, and the way they try to perform via positivas instead of via negativas is essentially criminal, and the way they try to they claim they're doing care, what they're actually doing is training in discipline and infantilization is actually criminal. So a lot of women's intuitions that are direct at small scale because they can manage the costs. In other words, they can say whether this is a good decision. If given scale, essentially externalize those costs, make them feel like they're doing good when it's actually doing bad. I mean, the logic of it's so fucking simple, really, in the end. But it requires us to stop thinking about ideal humans in the male frame, which is what the feminists were saying. The problem is the feminists think the women's method is right, and I'm like, actually, no, it's the compromise between the male and female that's right. Right? It's the compromise. It's a self-limitation, limiting the male overextension, limiting the female.
Say that again.
You have to. The feminists were right in that the female's logic frame is different. It's not really logical. There is a logical consistency to it, but it's not logical in the sense that male logic is logical, which is consistent and corresponding. It's instead not consistent with the reality. The female logic is consistent with harmony or non-conflict in the social.
It's for It's for emotional homeostasis.
Right, emotional homeostasis. Thank you. That's really good. How long did it take you to come up with that?
Well, 14 seconds.
No, but why did you?
After talking to you for a year and a half.
Okay, I was gonna say it.
But it's because they're calculating emotional states and maintaining a balance. That's all they're doing.
Yes, that's all they're doing. And so, which is of course maladaptive. Whereas male status seeking, which creates disruption, is adaptive, which is counterintuitive, right? So, oh fuck, I lost my train of thought. I was trying to complete that arc. Where we on? Oh, so the point I was trying to get across is that we've had this ideal human type that came from religion. The East Asians have had yin and yang, right, which is closer to the better, but they take it too far. And then we have trifunctionalism, which is the more sophisticated version of yin and yang, which is that there's the masculine, the feminine, right, and the rule of law that produces the equilibrium between them. And this preserves the competition rather than drive toward harmony by prohibiting the negatives instead of compelling the positives. And so the big difficulty is getting people to stop thinking in the ideal type, right?
Right.
Whether it's the European masculine or the Jewish feminine. Stop thinking in the ideal type, and instead of thinking of there are masculine and feminine types, and we are searching for means of reciprocity within them. And it's the test of reciprocity, exchange, which determines that we're not wrong. In other words, there's no right. We're not out. We're not out of the limits. We haven't violated cooperative homeostasis. I'm going to use that now. That was really smart. Thank you for that frame.
That's it.
Well, it's also consistent across.
So this is the solution. This is interesting. It's what it is there's a cooperative calculation occurring within bounds.
Wait. Tell me the context.
In the context of trifunctionalism,
Yes.
is cooperation within bounds
Determined by.
the reciprocity,
Yes.
but inside that field, within the cooperative limits, we have cooperative calculation occurring between individuals with varying values.
Yes, exactly. And so
And that's what you would just say markets.
we would create markets, right?
So the
Reciprocity.
cooperative calculation occurs within markets.
Yep. And so what we're trying to do is construct markets which give the people, which is counterintuitive, because it deprives the people of the feeling of certainty, which is the negative aspect of homeostasis, right? There's difference between temporal homeostasis, in other words, between you and I, and intertemporal homeostasis, which is decline. In other words, you're not growing.
Yeah.
Right. So what we're trying to do is continue growing, because it's the continual increase in growth that creates discounts on future opportunities to what we call consume, but experiment and try and do different things.
Okay. All right. I was thinking that the limits of cooperation are defined by reciprocity and moral outrage.
Yeah, correct. Moral outrage. Well, I'm trying to figure out if it's the experience of moral outrage or the behavior that results from moral outrage. Yeah, it's better to say this too. So it's because technically the way I would just say it is sufficient incentive to defect, right? From cooperation, which would be, undermining,
What non-participation in the cooperative marketplace?
right, or undermining it. Because that's the escalation.
That's war.
Well, war's as we describe it, it's sedition, treason, and war. Right, undermining, sedition, treason, war. Probably avoidance, denial, sedition, undermining, sedition, treason, and war. That's the spectrum.
Boycott's in there.
Yeah. What is the first one I gave?
Avoidance,
Boycott,
then denial.
then denial.
Yeah.
So undermining, sedition, treason, and war. Well, that's why people say reciprocity, and I'm like, reciprocity within the limits of proportionality. Because someone would say, well, you're just talking about inequality. And I'm like, well, I don't know what inequality means, because inequality is necessary for evolutionary computation. So equality means we starve to death. So what I mean is that it's not about equality per se. It's about proportionality. The incentive to participate still has to exist. Well, at present, the left and right no longer have reason. There's not enough value in political cohabitation to maintain cooperation between us. It's harmful to both parties, because neither can experiment and experiment, because we're collapsed into mediocrity by each other, which seems to be one of the patterns of history, by the way, is that when the institutions, formal and informal, can no longer adapt to the difference between the masculine and feminine parties. We don't think of them as, which is very, very different interests. Then what happens, or really it could be the classes, it depends on whatever it is, right? Is when those institutions not event, you have to have conflict, because the institutions are failing. Well, our institutions are failing because they're built for Europe, high trust Christian Europeans, right, who are supplying the military, means they're responsible for the defense of the nation state. And so we've exceeded that because we've introgressed too many people who want to avoid that responsibility, because what's the cognitively feminine response? It's evasion of responsibility for the commons. So right now the conservatives provide defense of the commons, and the progressives use it to extract from the conservatives. And then we have the irresponsible people who don't contribute to commons in urban density. It's just a fucking nightmare. So
Market failure.
Market failure because institutions can't do it. Well, why? Because there's a maximum degree of cooperation that's possible under any given model as the population and diversity expand under wealth, because all of us pursue our interests. So you can either deprive people of pursuing their interests, or you can, which is what we need, which is what they're trying to do, or we can just separate. And I think the way to separate is restore markets like we had in Europe. Why does that matter? Well, because Europe's the only civilization that's managed to go through 4 basic major reformations without, despite there's high conflict, but we've continued to evolve where every other civilization failed. So there's something to be said for maintaining the trifunctional nature, which which preserves the sovereignty of individual groups to form new states
to organize new polities to suit their new interests. And there's always going to be a diversity of interests. I mean, the Mediterranean is always going to be more comfy than the cold north, right? They're always going to be more about enjoying life and sunshine. And then the icy north is always going to be about maintaining harmony and close proximity in the cold. All right, it's just going to be that way, right? India, which is a lot of it's so fucking hot you can't breathe, right? And they're always going to move slower and be less ambitious because ambition is really painful. So I mean, I'm quoting an Indian who said this, right? And I'm like, but I can see a lot of Indians getting mad at me for saying that. I'm like, it's not me, dude. I mean, it's your folks that say that, is that the heat suppresses the industriousness that was common in Northern Europe because it's just too hard on you. And I'm like, well, I mean, I'm using that as a point to illustrate it, right? To illustrate the effects of climate.
Well, it would be ecological psychology.
Right. I mean, it's just it's like, duh, it's fucking obvious, right? I mean,
and it's like the environment selects for the psychology that it can works there.
Right. I mean, because exactly. I mean, it's not even hard to think about. I mean, and that's why the further north you get, the more domestication syndrome you get, because you're stuck in close proximity to more people who can be triggered more
frequently. They're going to forcibly civilize you,
remove you if you're a problem. And the second thing is your time horizon. Like, what's your time horizon in Africa where there's game permanently, right? What's your time horizon when you need to have agrarian stores to make it through an 8-month winter? I mean, these are different problems, right? And so you're going to develop different societies with different pressures that will manifest. Now, we used to think that populations didn't change very fast. Turns out they change really fucking fast. And one, can't remember, it's Khan or J-Man uses, which is how fast we adapted to lactose tolerance. It was fucking lightning fast, right?
An advantage.
Yes. And so, but there are the stress in the behavioral genetics field is over how much does your social context cause selection for traits, or essentially ostracization of traits. And I mean, I'm like, it looks really obvious to me. I mean, especially if we look at the extremes like gypsies and Jews and Northern Europeans and rice paddy farmers, right? I mean, it looks really obvious what behaviors are selected for. Now, the same is true in the Middle East. All right, they're selecting for impulsive aggression and defense of kin, family, clan, and tribe. So, I mean, because it's a low trust environment of high conflict. Essentially, the Middle East is the global equivalent of urban density.
It's just exhausted opportunity. Is what you get when you exhaust the opportunity. This is what it boils down to is just tooth and nail, right?
It's more like there's 4 continents and there's an asshole coming out of the steppe every 5 weeks, right? I mean, it's just, you know, you're in this period of constant, you have this great market because of that intersection. But because diversity is a bad, you have constant diversity, which prohibits the consolidation of trust. So they produce this fundamentalism as a means of addressing the problem of that they can have local trust, but they can't have political trust. They can never have scale. This is why all those civilizations. That's why they can't build any corporations. That's why they never could build.
Right.
So they never build a high trust society or rule of law. They do everything by force. Force on one hand, and threat of force on one hand, and threat of ostracization from the family, clan, tribe.
That's right. And that's a death sentence.
It's death sentence.
I'm looking this up because it's like the Morduck is that they had to make religion in the Middle East to settle all these differences because they have all these different people together.
Yep.
They don't like each other.
No.
And this is the chaos from which order had to be fought for by their God, right?
Well, I mean, they had to find a way of justifying the state that they were already in as virtuous, right? But what they succeeded in doing with Islam is really very simple. The tribal leaders were fucking horrible despots.
Yeah.
Moses was a very bad person, right? I mean, these are bad people in history. Well, all these tribal leaders. So what the Islam did was it essentially made the leaders decapitate, I mean, the people, the priesthood, decapitate these predatory tribal leaders, right? Very much like Africa. It worked. It was phenomenally successful. The problem is this came about because the Nicaeans, the Christians, had tried to convert Christianity from a religion literature, which was the dominant religion in the area, right? From a wisdom literature into a code of laws. Islam said, well, that ain't gonna this Christian shit can't work from us because we're tribal, right? And so if you're gonna make laws, we're gonna modify Christianity to contain the laws we need. So that's what happened. I mean, you think these things happen in accidents in history. They're not fucking accidents, right? People make rational decisions, right, at all times in response to problems that emerge. And so when the Christians the Byzantines, right, the Nicaeans tried to make Christianity in law, state policy, they basically forced the creation of Islam because the tribes can't do Christianity as law. They could only do Christianity within tribal orders. So Islam was a natural result of it. Now they tell all these stories around it, but reality, it's like what the story you tell about any history or mythology is the one that sells, right? So what we're talking about appeals to the market,
right?
But it's like, well, there's people like me in the Anglo-Saxon world who write law and science, whatever. And there's people in the Jewish world who write their nonsense, right? And there's people in the Islamic world who write there. I mean, and so there's a few of us. The truth is that it's almost always trickle down. Like people don't realize we live in a world created by David Hume and Adam Smith. The world we live in was created. Everything we think, talk, and feel was created by them. And before them, we live in a world created by Augustine and Aquinas. Before them, we lived in a world created by the Greeks and the Romans, which is a sort of cousin fucking thing going on there. I don't know, some goddamn thing. So before then, we lived in a world created by the European wing of the Indo-European expansion. We live in these worlds created by things, but it's surprising how much. What would the insult is called scribblers? That's how they call thinkers, is scribblers.
Right.
Is that the degree to which scribblers frame the world we live in. I mean, look what the guys who consolidated the biblical works into. I mean, scribblers wrote those versions of the parable. They turned it into a book, and they turned that book into a law, right? And then they governed with it. And I'm like, scribblers fucking matter, right? But the degree to which we live in Adam Smith's world, the ones we're aware of are Adam Smith and David, and less so David Hume, but we're certainly in the world of Blackstone. Americans live in the world of Blackstone as well, and a few others. But
I want to modify your statement a little bit to scribbler lives matter.
Oh, God. Oh. Oh. Killing me. Hey, I want to use an antihistamine. I'm going to pause for a second.
That'd be great.
Welcome back.
Well-
Thank you for. I've used my antihistamine. I'm slightly better. I made a fresh coffee, and Brad and I have been chatting long enough to finish half the cup. So, so we've been talking. Can I show the screen to the audience?
Of course.
And as we said, we were the problem we're trying to discuss is a story per audience. In other words, how do we reach? Just as there's a sect for every distribution Christianity, right? There's a grammar, a logic available to everybody. So the way we've sort of looked at this, and which helps make the work more digestible, is the conflict we've been running into is how do I consolidate all this shit into one fucking narrative, which is absolutely impossible because the story of history, the reduction to philosophy, the reduction to a formal logic by the science, the reduction to a constitution, all right, and the deep exploration of lying, and how to simplify this as a via positiva, which is we would think of as a religious reformation. These are all very different frames of reference. So what we ended up with is the following, which gets very far away from the, oh my God, this is a 6,000 page book. And so we've sort of said, let's just order it the way that people work, right? Well, the history, the philosophy, the science, right? The law applied, the defense against the future, which is really what we do about it, and what we do about it, and then the lessons learned, right, which is what you would think about as a religion, but it's the reduction of all of it to something that everybody can learn, the way they learn, scripture or times tables or history, whatever. That includes the myths to reinforce those general rules. So now we've broken the work into a thing that's not, the things that are not in conflict. And the history, the philosophy, the science, the law, the prosecution, the reduction, the prosecution, that's probably the wrong term here. The choice is probably better. The reduction of it and the parables about it. So I feel this is the first time I haven't been having a cognitive dissonance over how to reduce all those different frames into one book. If you look at what I originally wrote, I have a copy of, not original, but I have a copy of, these are the previous books, right? I've approached this problem similarly. And in this one, I told the history first. Right? I told the history first. And then worked my way through it. As philosophy, it's important because I discussed it as philosophy. But what I've done over the past year is work with a year and a half with Brad is we've reduced it to the science on top of it. In other words, I was previously trying to merge two things whose organization principles are different. This is a collection of essays from the past. This one is one of a repetition. We've already covered this one. This one is one of the early drafts, which is how I approached it in response as a reformation of libertarianism. This one is a short course in the, I don't want to say this with Brad here because he'll beat up on me. But it's a short course in the Abrahamic method of lying, and it's not a short course.
It's anything but short, actually.
Anything but short.
It's exhaustive.
I don't know what this one is. This is where I start out with the history, the uniqueness, etc. I took the how I contrasted it with the Abrahamic religion and the political consequences. And then I spent a lot of time talking about religion because I was trying to address the need for religion. The truth is, I've written, as you can see, a lot of books that I just don't publish because they're not there yet. Is that what I mean? So, I always go against other writers, like Taleb as an example. He publishes all these books in sequence only to get to the end and realize he's wrong. Right? That you can't, it's for the reasons I've said so. It's not the measurement he is seeking to estimate tails, long tails, cannot be identified until we have a unit of measure. The unit of measure can't be identified until we have Bayesian learning, which means artificial intelligence, right? Because we can't think in that level of weights and measures. It's not possible. And so mathematics, which he doesn't grab this either, despite being a statistician, is that mathematics is purely statistical, even at every level, because it's always a comparison of states. Right? So whereas computation isn't. Computation is takes a conditioned environment. So the problem is that he's trying to solve a computational problem in the absence of a unit of measure of computation, which could be then mathematically described. I don't know if that's way over everybody's head. It probably is.
Right. Computation is an ecological measurement, essentially, is what you just said.
Yes, computation is simulation, which doesn't count on the regularity of the thing in of itself, which is right, but counts on the regularity of a thing inside the simulation.
Mm-hmm.
So the problem is that with math, you need a unit of measure. He just keeps trying to find that by using economic data, but it's not there for reasons economists know. I'm covering a very, very tough, deep subject, and I should not even touch on it. The point is that that he published a bunch of books. He got to the end, and the answers he should have gotten to was Hayek's. It was like, it doesn't matter because you can't predict, and therefore all you can do is eliminate error. If you eliminate ignorance, error, bias, and deceit. And so he can't tolerate that because that would invalidate everything he takes pride in. Right. And so
behavioral economics.
Well, he uses Fat Tony's wisdom as a counter signal to credentials. And I'm like, well, that might be true, and what you're describing is unethical cunning, not productivity that conforms to reciprocity, the limits of reciprocity, which is the Anglo method. So the problem is he can't bring his work to conclusion because his premises are wrong.
Wait, it was based upon what work? You mentioned a name.
I don't know what I said. He said Fat Tony. Fat Tony's a character that he uses to talk about the cunning guy who works, who pragmatically operates on the street level of the market. And he's a statistician. He studies Mandelbrot, and he never fucking got there. Why? Because he's got a block in his head about how you solve this problem. Because if you solve that problem, it would mean that Fat Tony was actually a bad person. He can't actually go there. He can't go there to say I'm a bad person. He himself, right? So he's blocked by it. But for Hayek, you're not a bad person. You come to the conclusion that, oh, it's actually via negativa. all you do is adhere to the law as it evolutionarily expands, and anything within that can't be bad. But and so what the fact is, we're failing to measure. This is what he's saying. We're creating fragility, right? By failing to outlaw things that create fragility, right? I mean, because those are crimes. That's external social privatization of gains, socialization of losses. Whereas we would do full accounting. So he can't get to where we have to legislate it because it bothers him, right? So my view is, I'm not going to publish until I'm fucking right.
I approve of this methodology.
No, I mean, it's different. I don't have a financial incentive to publish. I don't have an ego incentive to publish. I have only one objective, is that's to make change. I don't
That's
have
right.
an academic emphasis to publish. I don't have a status. I mean, I don't have any reason to publish except
Other than being right.
other than being right. So, and I, if you look at our work, I'm right now. I'm sorry, fuck you. I'm right. There's just no chance I'm wrong. It's just zero, right? It was just not possible. So you could say, well, it's not. This is what I usually get. You could say, well, Curt, no, we don't need ideal governments. I didn't say that. I said you can measure the variation from ideal, and therefore anticipate the failings, which prohibits, which outlaws false promise that you will evade those subsequent costs, right? I mean, that's via negativa. So, but there's zero chance I'm wrong. I'm not wrong on anything, really. It's disturbing to me to say that, because I feel like I'm.
It sounds like an arrogant statement.
It sounds
many
arrogant,
people.
but it's like, you're not going to get out of it. You can't escape, time, space, gravity, whatever.
Wait, I'm going to repeat your tweet earlier. It's not my opinion, it's my judgment. I have found it to be true that I am not wrong.
So anyway, so we're still sharing. So we end up with history, philosophy, science, law. This will be the choice, probably. The lesson, right? And the examples. So I mean, I think that's probably what we get. Now we have a digestible book for each market. And so what I hope, I have to ask Martin to do is work on the consolidation of this while I work on this, because I can write this and I can work with you on that. I can work with him on this.
Yeah.
But I don't see anybody else to be able to produce this content in the form I want.
Right.
With the rigor I want. It's just too hard. However, I know that I can actually go over that with Martin and Brandon and Luke and you. I know I can do that, probably with Contra Fabian, maybe a couple of the other guys. And now I can go over it and attest it by going over with you guys. But
right.
So anyway, that's my gut on everything, and I feel deconfused for the first time in a long time. Last time I felt deconfused is when we decided when you forced me to decide to pull out the science. All right, so that's where I am. And so now I can see this getting done now. Brandon said he's understood everything since 2019.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but this right here in front of us, that's the whole thing, right? You're not getting out of that box. There's no way out of that box. Because no matter which frame you jump into, from history to lying to simplification to the law, You just can't get out of it. There's just no way. So what I needed at the beginning, I have this part. Where is it? Evolutionary laws of nature. Group strategy. See this right here, these group strategies.
Yeah. Wait, I'm not seeing it.
Oh, fuck, sorry. I did it again. I swore.
Oh no.
Trying to not use the F word online.
You're failing pretty badly today. I'm trying not to act shocked.
I fail often, but it doesn't mean I'm not trying. So,
Right?
So, as I was saying, I'm really excited about how well What a Falsifist has done at this section of comparative civilization. And I can basically link to, well, he hasn't done these two. I can basically link to those and get it, but I have to define it in our terms.
Yeah.
His historical treatment is absolutely wonderful. So my view is that his historical treatment needs to go in here. And then I can just use the reductive, I can put it in scientific terms over here.
Right.
I'm just on a high about this guy because I spent a lot of time with him lately, and he's really fucking good. But there's a real need for that narrative explanation of history, because I have to reduce it to a logic in here.
Right.
And that's not the same without the narrative of history context.
Right.
And he's already done all this work. So anyway, I'm going to end again. So I just love this fucking thing. There we go. I feel warm and fuzzy inside. So now my basic concern is I shoot Martin at the philosophy.
Right.
I throw myself at the science. You'll help me with that. Easy. And then I bet I could get Brandon to do a review on the Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
I am working with Brandon on the website content, but that won't take forever. So maybe after that he'd give me a task list for the Constitution.
Yeah.
And you have things you've caught up to. So I don't know. I feel like for me to write all the science, the logic, the parts that aren't written. There's a lot of it out there, but the parts that aren't formally there, that's not hard to me. I actually really enjoy that. The rest of it's consolidation and editing down, which Martin can probably do.
Right.
All right. So that's we've gone 2 or 3, 2.5. No, we were offline for a while, right? I said
Yes.
2.5 hours. All right. Do I have anything else today? No.
How about that?
All right. So that's what I wanted to cover today.
Brilliant.
That is it. That was what I wanted to do. And I expected this to be a long fucking, and it wasn't. You're always ruining my expectations, man. It's just
Sorry, brother.
Anyway, so I think we can call it a day. And I will get
Absolutely.
I will get back to work. And thank you very much for this yet again. For those who are following, like, subscribe, bell, comment, and consider the donation page. If we repeat this often, it doesn't mean anything. It's just our followers have told us to just include this in there as part of the recitation.
We're following orders.
We're just doing what we're told. All right. I love you guys. Thank you, Dr. Brad. Talk to you tomorrow, right?
That sounds like a
I
good
have no
plan.
idea what we're gonna do tomorrow, but we'll figure something out.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Enjoy the day.